here today with not a lot of revenue is probably not the best. I got to say that's probably not the best title to have. It used to have some level of impact. Now it's, well, a lot of people are saying, what are you actually doing at the moment? So unfortunately, we're getting a small amount of revenue and it's generating a huge amount of activity and kind of, time and labour.
So Chief Revenue Officer, Air New Zealand, I think, was it the business went from, was it 6 billion to 500 million? Is that about right?
You're rubbing it in already.
No, it's just such a gnarly, like it's such a crazy thing to even like comprehend how.
I'm delighted to be on this show. It's bringing me back down to earth if I haven't been for the last 2 months. But it's fair to say April we produced less revenue than our forecast had expected us to do so. So, it's very uncertain in terms of how much revenue we will be generating because it's very sensitive to, one, what the travel restrictions will be in level 2. And secondly, whether or when we can get some international short haul going. So we've been using that 500 million. It could be more than that, it could be less, but it's certainly going to be a lot less than 6 billion. That's one thing I can absolutely say.
So when you get on the phone, is this literally your role to try and go from the number you're at now to 10x? Is this your responsibility, basically?
Well, it's a collective responsibility. I've got a fantastic bunch of leaders, half of them in international markets and half of them in New Zealand. So there's a few components. I've got the cargo division, and that has been a light on the hill in terms of a bright spot for Air New Zealand because we are generating cargo revenue. And also our loyalty business. And our loyalty business continues to go. People continue to accrue points, whether it's through groceries or, different suppliers we have or partners that we have on the ground. So that is a benefit of having a diversified business. And then what we're trying to do is just move essential workers around New Zealand and having some international connectivity, primarily for cargo basis. It's less about focusing on revenue outcomes. It's more now about helping New Zealand recover from this crisis by connecting essential workers around the country where possible. And our part in this is to make sure that we keep products and services moving while we don't really have any demand or the government don't really want people to be travelling. So it's very, very, very different.
Oh man, totally. What's become pretty clear is the butterfly effect of this one single thing. Its tentacles have gone into every single world, every single industry, every single vertical. But with a business like Air New Zealand, it touches the entire globe. The logistical nightmare is logistics because that's actually what it does. It's how are you like mentally even dealing with compartmentalizing each little part that affects the whole thing? Like it's an entire moving beast, right? Like how are you actually genuinely mentally navigating through dodgeball of challenges? Like how's it? How are you doing that?
Yeah, well, we've got a really tight executive team here at Air New Zealand. So all individuals look after their different functions. So we collaborate pretty well together. We're talking, in terms of the business rhythm we've got into, we have a call every morning at usually 7:30 or 8 o'clock for about an hour, and we have one at 5 or 6 o'clock for the same amount of time. And that's because things have been evolving and developing so quickly in our part of the business community that we want to be up to date as quick as possible. We also have two other streams. One is communicating as effectively and efficiently as we can with our staff. And our staff are, working on planes. They might be based offshore or based around New Zealand. So that's incredibly important for us. And then just getting feedback to our customers, our loyal customers who want to know what's happening with our schedule, our flights, social distancing, when we think we might be participating in other markets. So, really focusing on over communication, both with our customers and our staff, has been the kind of mode we've been trying to get into. And that's been hopefully successful for us, but it is very, very different. As an example, we don't really have any competitors, and a lot of the information that historically I would have seen as commercially sensitive, we can talk about pretty openly because we don't really have a revenue management engine. We've got some flights, but not many. We can talk about how many passengers we have a day. There's been some great collaboration, I have to say, through other airlines too. So I'm very regularly talking to United Airlines, Singapore Airlines, Qantas about what they're seeing in the marketplace, what demand signals they're picking up, and also what's happening with the virus and how they're going in terms of flattening their curve.
You brought up a point about the data, right? How does it actually work in terms of all the data gets collected in real time all around the globe, consolidated and digested down and back up the team, and then what that means for business? Like, is there just talk me through like the data that comes in, like that workflow process, because I'm imagining that stream needs to be efficient, tight, accurate, on point the entire time from everywhere, because you've just got, I think the challenge is there's so many touch points, so how are you navigating data for decisions through all this?
Yeah, so we have a team set up called the General Emergency Management Team. So they work for a guy called Dave Morgan, who's our chief pilot. He looks after safety and security. So they manage the response in terms of our operation and what we're seeing across global markets. And then what we try and do as an executive team is react to schedule adjustments or different processes which are largely driven by central government about where and when you could fly, what it's going to mean for essential travel or leisure travel in different zones. And I suppose, I've spent more time looking at graphs to do with viruses and curves and infection levels than I ever thought I would. But we're very connected into central government, and we're very focused on making sure that we do the right thing to support New Zealand's efforts to eliminate the virus. So we're in very much constant communication with the Ministry of Transport and government agencies, and making sure that we're doing the right thing as the country tries to deal with this. Because our kind of core belief is we start from a good fiscal position in terms of the country, and we want to reimagine what tourism can be, but we can only do that if we eliminate the disease. So we're very fixated on making sure that we're in lockstep with the process from the Ministry of Health and from central government.
I was going to say as well, you're lucky we had Fife on the show the other day, and I'm sure with him down in Wallace as well, it's giving good context from the inside of all the different moving parts as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just a fantastic call. Obviously, I work for Rob when he was CEO here, and just an unbelievably smart individual, right? I always used to worry about sessions with Rob, because he'd always take a completely different approach, completely different to what you expected, and just a really, really different and strategic thinker. So it gave us a massive amount of confidence that the government brought Rob in to lead some of the commercial response. And I think that's fantastic for us, but also fantastic for the balance of the business community to have someone of his stature in that role. And plus, he's also doing it for free, which is good for the finances.
That's what I said to him. He was saying he'd done like 35 days straight or something, and I was just like, mate, no overtime, no shit. It's like, this is flipping weird. What is good about it though is he's that crossover point, right? Because the streets still mess with him and they know what's up, and he's got cred, but he also sits on the other side and he understands how the political game works. Plus, he's got the ability to be able to, shake the right trees the right way, and no one can say shit, right? So it's like he's the perfect Kiwi person that understands our world to then be in that world that can try and shake the tree in their world. So no, totally, and especially when you look at, you talked about before, this reimagine phase. We had Tim Alp on the show, CEO of Juicy Rentals, and he was basically saying, 97% decrease in revenue overnight, right? Like all these different crew just getting smoked through, like buddy Ryan Saunders from Haka Tours, he's in the mix. Everyone's just this thing is just push pause and everything. The approach that you go back out into market is going to be clearly different based on obviously what happens with if there's a bubble or not, who can come in or not, all the rest of it. How do you kind of use this opportunity to reimagine in your head what you think tourism and maybe just go travel and tourism could be in New Zealand, I guess domestically and internationally after this?
Yeah, well, the first thing is we think New Zealand's got a really robust and enduring proposition. And I think on a relative basis, I think what New Zealand has, which was always attractive to the world, on a relative basis is going to be even more attractive. So I think the worst thing that could happen is that we come out of this crisis with and we just have the same industry that we started with. So we need to take a pause and take the opportunity to really assess what we need as an industry. And ultimately, I think that's probably going to be a smaller industry with higher value tourists. Clearly, we want them to have a significant economic upside for the country, but we want all stakeholders to contribute in that upside. But also, we've got to be mindful of the environmental impact, because I think there was, and there still is, open debates and robust debates about over-tourism and having too many people at a certain moment of time and too many tourist hotspots. So I think it's mindful for us to sit back and say, how do we take this opportunity to reassess what markets we want to open up, when could we and should we open them up, and what type of tourists we want. And then for Air New Zealand, it was going to be what kind of aircraft do we fly to what markets, what are some of the health components of the new customer journey. So things like, how do we board with physical distancing? Should, both crew and passengers in the short to medium term wear masks? What kind of sanitation do we have? How do we look after our crew in a really proactive way? So we look at a customer journey in terms of what we call 15 stages of customer journey. And that starts from when you think about booking to when you do book, to when you board, when you get on the aircraft, when you disembark the aircraft. So we're looking at every stage of that customer journey and saying, how can it be different and how can it be more productive? But also, how do we make it more enduring and more actually make it better for not only in New Zealand, but for the whole industry and the whole economy.
Yeah, we had Janine Crossan on, who she's a founder of Powered by Flossie, and so basically, she's in the hair, beauty, makeup, SaaS business for different all over show. She was saying, the hygiene expectations of the Yelp for safety of how this whole thing's going to change. They're going to want people. It's going to change the entire dynamic, not only with the operations themselves, with people touching hair and touching nails and fingers, because it's so personal. And we kind of talked about this idea of there's going to be this like instinctual, natural. It's almost like this fear-based economy for safety. And then so to your point, to these 15 steps, you're probably. I'm imagining that the tone is, how do you reimagine this entire journey based on a economy of fear and safety, and each different touch point, how does that then change? Now, those
hairdressers, they need to come to us. We've got a very sophisticated revenue management pricing model, which we've turned off. And I tell you what, there's going to be a tremendous amount of pent-up demand. So this is an opportunity, to sell those first haircuts at a much, much larger fair or rate, you see?
There has been, I don't know if you probably don't follow the same Instagram account as me, but in the American hip hop culture world, all the rappers' hair's just been growing out, and it's just, there's this crazy just bad, and they've been bringing other people and making them show how bad their hair is, and so it's getting so funny.
It's fair to say I don't follow rappers on Instagram, but anyway, probably more like aged politicians.
Okay, well, I'm sure everyone's going to need the good hair. I've seen some shockers though. I've been on some Zoom calls, and some people have tried some Hove man. It's not good. Oh, the joys. Do you feel so? What does it mean for domestic tourism at level 2? I haven't looked too much into the thing. What does that change? What can and can't be done at the moment? Have they brought out guidelines, or what's the go?
No, well, it's a really important component for us. It's yet to be determined. So as it stands today, it's not encouraged, and there would be social distancing. But we're looking for some specificity on that in the next 48 hours. So that could change. If it's constrained, whereby the government is saying we only want essential workers to travel, we will just probably add some more flights, but it wouldn't be a huge increase. If it's unconstrained and they say, actually, we think we've got this under control and we want to encourage Kiwis to travel around the country, we will quite quickly add more frequency and more network. And then we will start promoting quite heavily, because we'll have literally hundreds of thousands of existing customers who have credits that they want to spend. We think there's going to be quite a surge of short-term demand, so pent-up demand. So people who have been locked at home for 4, 6, 7, 8 weeks will want to go and see the country. Also, there's one of the potential of a peak skiing season if that comes right. So yeah, we think there's potential fantastic opportunity and upside in the domestic market. It already represents about 50% of the tourism industry anyway. So yeah, we're pretty encouraged by that. We just need to know what the details are, and once we understand those constraints, we'll then start marketing in any way, shape, or form.
And imagine as well the amount of international travel budgets that you've been spending is going to get probably redeployed locally as well if they can't, these other crew can't do anyway. Like I was talking to someone else in the game and they were saying, mate, this is just redirected all our international marketing just to go local, to double down on local. And we've been talking about this idea of this kind of hyper local resiliency of really, really backing that local spot really. And we had Tim Alp was trolling in the comments the other day and he was saying, bluff over Bali. And you're coming up with all these different sort of things. Like, so I definitely feel the pull for Kiwis to help Kiwis. It's really clear that everyone's on the same page to genuinely do that. And I think the escapism piece, you're also exactly right, because they're going to want to, get out, see somewhere, and especially if they've got the credit. I hadn't even thought of that whole thing, because there's probably all these unused credits which are sitting there and everyone's like, stuff it, we're going to Wanaka, let's go shred, let's, do something, So that's kind of cool. I like the...
Well, I think there's a number of opportunities. One is the Airbnb market, if you look at Wanaka and Queenstown. So those rooms or those houses, coupled with the hotel accommodation sector, they're going to be freed up because international tourists aren't in New Zealand. So that'll be freed up for the domestic market, which will mean some pretty fantastic accommodation options for locals, and they'll be well priced. We have obviously a lot of planes on the ground that we can deploy quite quickly if the demand's there. And then we have assets. So we've got Grab a Seat, we've got our website, we've got obviously our loyalty database. And as I say, we've got a bank of credit. So we do think there's going to be certainly some short-term intensity of people, relatively frustrated, wanting to get out, see the country, and we think the country's got a lot to offer. So we're quite confident in the short to medium term. It's like how do we restart the international long haul business is a more strategic challenge for us. Because quite frankly, if it's North America or if it's Asia for us, at the moment we've got our people in market, and to a degree we've put them in hibernation where we don't have any likelihood of services in the short to medium term. So how do we keep our flexibility so when we want to fly back there, we can restart as quickly as possible? But how do we keep our costs as low as possible as well? Because, we're carrying a lot of cost at the moment and not covering that with any revenue.
Yeah, I was going to, two parts to that. One is the planes. So right now, like how many airplanes does Air New Zealand own?
Well, we've got about just over 110 aircraft. Some of them are owned and some of them are leased. So depending on what fleet type they are, there's a combination,
And say the big planes that are flying all around the show that were, are they all packed up and like did everyone come back home to New Zealand? Are they packed all around the world? Like logistically, where's all your shit?
So we've got 3 parking lots. We've got Auckland Airport, we've got Christchurch Airport, and we have Nelson. And Nelson's got a lot of our turboprops. So we have in total around 70 aircraft which are parked. Now, if you want to park an aircraft for the long term, you'd send it to a place like Alice Springs or other really, really hot temperatures where it's has a less impact on the aircraft itself. So our aircraft are still in New Zealand, and that's where they'll be in the short to medium term, unless if we make the difficult decision to what we do is put some aircraft in long-term storage, then you'd move them out of New Zealand because of the atmospheric conditions and the weather. So yeah, it's a bit depressing both for our staff and actually some of our customers to see a line of planes parked, because ultimately that's a whole bunch of jobs, that's a whole bunch of economic activity. And we, and I certainly believe in the social and economic good of travel, so we are very keen to get those up in the air as soon as practical. But those wide bodies, the 787s and the 777s, it feels like it's quite a long way away.
Yeah. the strategy that you have to go globally, you'll stage out, is it country by country, region by region? How do you think about with what, because countries may be open for business, but we or you might not feel comfortable to then do that. Like, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? What type of conversations are happening with what medical says, what government says, to what you feel? Like, how does that balance of tension between the want for revenue with the need for safety, plus the power of politics, plus the like, just how does that work as this rolls out? Because obviously we hopefully get the stamp of a bit of safety, great, and then how do these rings expand operationally?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, we are in lockstep with the government and the health authority. So this is not being commercially led, and it shouldn't be commercially led. It's been led by making sure and ensuring the country is set up for long-term success by being free of the virus. And, in the short term, that really impacts us, and it impacts our people, and it impacts our revenue and our commercial outcomes. But the reality is, our core belief is having a country which is positioned as virus-free is better in the medium and long term. So we have a lot of aspiration and hope around the Trans-Tasman border. At some stage, in the months to come, that will start opening up. The second phase of that hopefully would be the Pacific Islands. And then if you look at our medium to long haul markets, we think that's going to take some time longer. And we also think that, that will require government agreement in terms of who can travel on a point-to-point basis and what does it mean for connecting traffic. So if you look at Singapore as a market, most of our business is not domiciled in Singapore, it's actually connecting traffic. So how do we manage that from third parties connecting over Singapore? So we'll be working with government agencies to make sure that they are very comfortable that our systems and processes are in play. And we've got a big team here to work on the health outcomes. But we'll be absolutely led by them rather than us trying to push and say, commercially, we need to get back to North America, therefore, we really want you to open up their borders. It's actually the opposite. We're saying, when you're comfortable with opening up these borders, we'll come in behind and restart these markets.
Yeah, that balance off is going to be a tricky one to navigate as it
and
rolls out.
We've got to be pragmatic, and we've been pretty pragmatic with our customers, our stakeholders, the tourism industry, but also the staff, to say that, ultimately, whatever happens in the next year or two, Air New Zealand is going to be a much smaller business. So we're going to have less planes flying and we'll be gaining less revenue. It's just how much smaller and for how much longer.
Yeah, the how long is the piece of string thing. What I do think is interesting is going to be the if New Zealand stamps it out, the only way it gets in is through people, and the only way people get in is through airplanes. So it's intrinsically linked. It's probably going to be the biggest ongoing, most critical part that government will be asking for as well from you too. Like, what's happening with baggaging, touching, getting on, seating, the whole sort of thing as well. Do you feel when long haul comes back off and you want to go to New York or Milan or whatever, do you think that the kickoff will be, will tickets be twice as expensive and there'll be half as many people on the seats? Do you get your own row each? Like, what are the conversations around how people will initially start, and like, what's the conversation there with how it will work logistically so far in terms of the customer experience on?
Yeah, and that's something that we're talking about at the moment, and we've kind of assessed a whole bunch of options from, as I say, do we have customers and all staff wearing masks? What happens with physical distancing? Because that could be different jurisdictions could have different views on whether that's going to be appropriate. Is the social distancing 1 metre or is it 2 metres? Obviously, the cleaning of the aircraft has become into distinct focus, more focus than it's been probably in 75 years of the airline. So every part of that customer journey, from how we operate our lounges, how we board the aircraft, how we do pre-seating, because as an example, when we start domestic, even if there is social distancing, there'll be some family groups and some bubbles travelling on our services. And what we're saying is, well, they should be able to sit together because clearly social distancing isn't relevant for that small group of people. So it's really getting into a level of detail and data about how we could restart this. I mean, one thing is clear: we would be incrementally starting our long haul business. We wouldn't just be going back to what it was. And price is always going to play a relatively significant factor in getting tourists to come to New Zealand, because the market is going to be smaller in my view, because we'll be working in a global recession. So there's going to be less discretionary income. And New Zealand, or Air New Zealand as a carrier, we're quite unique because we carry what we call inbound leisure customers. So New Zealand's not a big business market. So the people who ultimately travel to New Zealand on Air New Zealand wide body services are generally tourists. So they need the discretionary income. They need the willingness to pay to go on a long haul journey. They need to understand where New Zealand is, and they need to understand what New Zealand has to offer. And usually they need to take between a week and 2 weeks leave. So all of those factors mean that, we need to have the right price promoted to the right person at the right time in the market, in the right market. It does set some challenges for us, but once again, I get back to what the core proposition is going to be. And the core proposition, if it can be an unbelievably fantastic place to visit with great tourism facilities and a virus-free environment, I think that's going to stack up on the global stage. And we've got to have a bit of aspiration and a bit of confidence to sell that in the marketplace.
Yeah, exactly that point. If we agree that we're going into, I guess, from a customer's perspective, a economy of fare-based economy, and then they're thinking about if New Zealand was known as green, and now it's safe and green, all of a sudden you almost get this funky double up, because then the power of the brand of what New Zealand represented was it's green and safe, and I think it almost goes it's safe and green. So I think the 1 + 1 might equal 3, especially as you don't know what's going to happen with second and third waves that are hitting all over the globe as well. So I mean, obviously the branding of New Zealand from a Tourism New Zealand perspective is going to be a huge part of it. But I was just thinking about your pricing before there, especially with the bubbles. That makes total sense, right? That your pricing crew start thinking about, okay, well, how do we do family bubble packs, and how does the brand of the bubble become a pricing thing for a whole bunch of different customer experiences and products and offerings and services? Combo the bubbles, you get to get that whole. It's almost, there's going to be new ways of the psychology around pricing and what people choose to experience is going to be so much different now. Like it's obviously opportunity through all of it, but at the same time a bunch of challenging times, right? Because how many staff did you have? How many staff did
so we started with 12,500, and about 1,000 of those were based offshore, so just over 11,000 based in New Zealand. So I mean, we've got a big job to do in terms of repackaging what we offer both Kiwis, and that'll be probably a more bespoke product for Kiwis. And then when we get back into those long haul markets, how we connect to Tourism New Zealand, and we're in very much lockstep with Tourism New Zealand. They position the brand of New Zealand, and then we try and convert the brand and the awareness and the active considerers into actually travellers to New Zealand, and then hopefully New Zealand gets the economic upside out of that. So there's a huge opportunity, but our network could or should look different after this, because we don't know what country is going to open up first. We don't know what the competitive dynamic's going to be. So there might have been some markets that were highly competitive, that our competitors make a call that they don't come back to New Zealand because they may have sold some planes, or the economic upside of the airline doesn't give them the ability to travel this far to New Zealand, because New Zealand's we're not a natural hub for most carriers. So we're what we call an end of the line carrier. So large carriers come to New Zealand probably in the last 10% of their network design, not in their core network. And what you've seen is most carriers, focusing, as you'd expect, on their core business. And most carriers are also shrinking. Most carriers will be 20 to 40% smaller, irrespective of what their going in network was. So the whole aviation industry is going to look quite different. And our kind of core view is we don't see unconstrained travel coming back until there's a vaccine which is readily available right across the globe. That's going to be the trigger for us to really stimulate demand.
Yeah, crew was telling me on the Stealth, they were thinking from their source was 20% chance of vaccine by the end of this year, 90% chance by the third quarter of next year. And he was saying, even if that, you're at a, Rob actually was talking about the other day, was saying, we've got this, I've been thinking about pre-COVID, after COVID. He was actually saying, well, during COVID, like Wallace
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
The bit isn't just like we're out of 4 into the 2, so that whole thing. But I was also thinking about the tourism side. So I sit on the board of Figure NZ with Stephen England Hall, CEO at Tourism New
yeah,
Zealand, and texting away and just saying, it's like, mate, it's like we're a startup.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
back to it. So it's kind of changed
yeah.
that whole dynamic. And then, do you think is there conversations going down the route of, hey, if we know that there's this type of leisure market that's coming in, should the government subsidize, it's cheap international travel after it's safe, so we can actually get people here to be able to spend that additional cash? Like, are people, how are they talking about what's the vibe of how they can entice things in, more people in quicker? Is that type of stuff been brought up yet around your circles?
Yeah, so that is basically Tourism New Zealand's role to stimulate the market and to drive what we call either resilient travellers in the future, because we're going to need some of those in the next kind of 18 to 24 months, and drive a consideration towards people who have thought or know about New Zealand to actively considering and then coming. And what we do is we're what we call the conversion partner. So we try and generate attractive packages and or price points to convince people that last step, to get them to move from being a considerer to actively coming to New Zealand and then contributing to our economy and the tourism industry or economy in New Zealand. So yeah, our expectation is that Tourism New Zealand will really need to double down on the investment in offshore markets, because they'll be competing with Australia and Canada and a whole bunch of countries who also have had their tourism industries decimated and destroyed by this virus. So they'll be looking to compete for those tourists who have the capability to travel and the resources to spend. So we think that market's going to get hugely competitive. So between Tourism New Zealand and Air New Zealand, we're going to have to market smarter to identify a bunch of customers who are willing to, go 12, 13, 14, 18 hours to New Zealand and spend a couple of weeks here. So it's going to be quite a unique challenge. And you're right, it is in some markets going to be like restarting again.
The combo of the two, yeah, I can see how the butterfly effect, it just makes you think of that next little piece, What I've always found interesting traveling the world over few years is whatever's like the coolest thing. Right at first, it's like, oh my gosh, Lord of the Rings. It's like, yes. Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
Hobbit. Yes. Oh my gosh, Flight of
yeah,
the Conchords. Yes. Oh my
yeah,
god. But there's always these things you just kind of wonder, like, from a global perspective, it's just like one mega mashup of everything that you've ever known for New Zealand.
yeah,
Package it up, there you go. But on the
yeah.
other side of that, the creative marketing challenge to do a
Mm.
market real quick the second it opens has got to be such a big one. So from from a brand standpoint, it's actually probably going to be potentially an exciting marketing opportunity to market quick and effectively with good creativity to try and convert those, I guess, those communities into customers, but through the right type of creative content. Because what we've kind of seen from an advertising perspective anyway, from a bunch of stuff, is
Yeah,
every single brand doing the exact same thing.
yeah,
Slow motion, empty shots,
yeah, yeah,
piano in the background,
yeah,
voiceover. For 65 years we've been, it's like,
yeah.
fuck. But when everyone
Stay
does the
safe.
same
Yeah,
shit,
I
it's
know.
like, oh
Yeah. Be
jeez.
kind. Stay safe. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I mean that's exactly right. I mean, one of the other commercial considerations we have is when we restart, even around New Zealand, our expectation is certainly in the short to medium term, there's probably going to be less business travel. So we've had quite a significant amount of our business in New Zealand is people traveling for meetings or seeing customers. That's a relatively significant part of domestic travel. Now we think the technology that Jason and Jolie and everyone, the technology has worked pretty well through this process. Unfortunately, well, fortunately and unfortunately, but it's a competitive product for us, and we think in an economic recession there'll be many businesses, small, medium, and large, who say, look, flying to Wellington for 2 hours to have an internal meeting for a couple of $100 is probably not going to be high in the agenda. So we think substitute products like this, like Zoom and Microsoft Teams, are going to be better deployed, better used, and they will have some form of impact on our revenue. We're not sure how much and for how long, but you've got to be pragmatic and realistic that there's going to be businesses are going to be redefined about working from home, using technology, and whether it impacts us, commercial real estate. We just think it's going to be quite a big shift. I mean, this process has accelerated everything.
I'd never thought of the fact that
That's more
tech
bad
as a
news.
competitor for travel. No, because it's a really because a bunch of people have been talking about it. They're saying,
Yeah,
they've been thinking about, but there's been this tension of like the first thing is, oh shit, I probably won't travel as much to do this because I can just do these Zoom calls. I would never have thought from a travel airline that a tech company would have actually been a competitor, but for that exact moment, it actually is. But what I've also found is through the rise of the use of tech, two awesome things. One, yes, tech can still keep businesses operating that are on publicly traded. Yes, thousands of people can still be employed. If this happened 10 years ago, we'd be flipping shit show down the creek if Chorus hadn't done what they've done. Great. But
yeah,
secondly, the overuse of technology, the thing that people are actually missing is the human interaction, the people, the
yeah,
actual face to face. And so I think the emotive DNA of human beings has not only been challenged and tested, but actually verified that yes, we're more connected than ever. Yes, technology is great and totally get that. But what everyone wants to do right now is to be able to see their friend, give them a cheers, high five, and a hug. And I don't think
yeah,
that's actually
yeah,
been validated probably more so than ever. So I think the connection points have just been not eliminated. It's actually been doubled down for those that care. And it's probably just going to be a filter of, is it
yeah,
really important? Like
yes,
there's going to be that line which sort of changes the way out. But I was thinking about, you're saying 110 sort of planes for yourself, and we've
yeah.
seen other airlines starting to sort of go under around the world. Logistical question: what physically happens to all these flipping planes and shit from everyone else if that when they're going? Because
Yeah,
there's going to be more and more that drop. What
yeah,
happens when the supply is flipping 10x the demand? Like,
yeah.
what
Well, so
happens?
practically, most airlines are doing exactly what we have done is either put them in light storage, which is just in a tarmac, or some airlines put them in heavy storage. And then some lessors will take back the aircraft, and then other airlines will be trying to sell them in a pretty tough market to sell. And then the really, really old aircraft where there's no second-hand market, they actually unfortunately go to a bit of a graveyard and get chopped up into scrap metal. So I think that's one of the realities that is actually playing out now. There's a massive oversupply of aircraft because people generally in our game, they buy aircraft in the really, really, really good times. And when the aircraft come into the fleets, there's either an economic slump or a recession or a fall in demand. And this is a fall in demand like we've never seen before. I think IATA brought out the forecast. I think this year the industry is going to lose 252 billion or something like that. It's just eye-watering numbers. So I think the industry is bunkering down. As I said before, there's also been really great collaboration because there's not a lot of competition going on between airlines saying, right, how do we make customers more confident about their ability to safely get on and off a plane? So there's got to be some industry solutions for that. That can't be just Qantas or Air New Zealand or Singapore Airlines. We've got to get a level of consistency so when they're connecting or traveling to different parts of the world, they're comfortable about that customer journey. So, yeah, I mean, the whole industry at the moment is just focusing on the core, making sure we've got that cash to survive this unbelievably big dip, and then having some confidence about the future and that there is a social and economic good for travel and it will come back. And I'm with you, we used to run a campaign probably a decade ago called being there is everything. And we do think a source of competitive advantage as a small country that kind of trades with the world in an export-led recovery, ultimately people will want to get in front of their customers and they will want to kind of communicate face to face. We just think there's going to be a gap for that to restart again.
Yeah, with the marketing piece to add thing, just get Taika to help direct it, and they'll give a nice little punch with the Star Wars piece. It should help with a bit more engagement, I'm sure.
Yeah.
The do you think would you like Uber? Would you charter planes? Like, would it even be financially feasible or a potential viable revenue line to charter planes like flipping like Uber, like UberX?
Well, we charter planes now, and actually, as I say, Dave Morgan, who's heading out as our chief pilot, he's been organising a number of charters, repatriation charters. So we did we've gone to some places that we either haven't been for decades. So Frankfurt we went to, and to India a few weeks ago. So we've actually run quite a few charters getting tourists who are based in New Zealand back to their home base. And we have quite a vibrant charter business when we're operating at full capacity. The problem always with charters is what we call dead legs. So, we could take a whole bunch of people to India for 2 weeks, but we've got to get the aircraft back to New Zealand. And incumbent in the operating costs, you've got to price it for both legs. And one of the legs is usually dead, which for us means it's flying empty. So that means the charter costs, when they get distributed back to the cost per passenger, are always higher than customers would expect. So if we can find a way to mix and match demand, that sometimes works. And we've done a number of charters over the years to different destinations. Quite a few to Vegas, quite a few to Australia. So at the moment, we're looking at most things, to be honest, because it's such a different world and a different environment.
Yeah, we had Olivia Wensley, who's the head of Queenstown Lakes, startup Queenstown Lakes, the CEO there, talking about they're looking to potentially have like a tourism tech sort of mini hub thing. And I was just thinking, I was wondering, if you could batch on board a whole bunch of people with where they wanted to go, whatever, an AI backend to be able to potentially consolidate different batches. There's something in there, and I'm sure people are obviously thinking about it. But I know you're a busy man, you got a bunch of shit to do. But before we go, I was going to ask you about the bubble between.
Yeah, I'm not counting our revenue. That's one thing I'm not doing at the moment. So
But
I can nearly call every passenger at the moment, literally, and just thank them for their service.
Thanks, John. Thanks for flying on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Thanks for the charter to back to India.
Yeah.
The bubble, Anzac bubble.
Yes.
Do you think
it
will be, if it drops, if it goes to L2 and you get that potential thing between Australia, that's going to be awesome for Queenstown. How do you see the potential bubble working between New Zealand and Australia, but also potentially the islands as a safer bubble? Because obviously you can't control who comes into them, but who comes here. How do you see that potentially working as a thing?
Well, the first thing is that would be really material and positive for us. We've got 22% of our capacity into Australia. We fly into 8 places, and before the started, we had 80 services a week on average. So it's actually more important to Air New Zealand than any other carriers who go or fly the distance. So the way we would see it working is the government's coming up with an approved customer journey. So that might be saying only point-to-point travel, so no connecting traffic. It could be just New Zealand resident or passport holders with Australian resident passport holders. It could start up from a state to state. So obviously with the state and federation, Australia could say, it's just Victoria, or it's just Western Australia, or it's just South Australia. We fly to all those destinations anyway. And then what we'd be looking to do is connect to the government to prove the concept, to start slowly to say, we are comfortable and we can put considerations into that customer journey. It might be you might have to check in a lot earlier. As I say, there have to be some distinct changes to your boarding. It may or may not have physical distancing. It may require some testing at the gate or before you depart. We do think that the requirement for a stand down is not really practical, because it means, for a weekend trip, you're a month in a hotel. So that's really not a practical outcome. So we're very open to any consideration or working with either Qantas or Jetstar or the authorities in the airports, and clearly the government and health authorities, to make sure that we can do all possible to open up those trade corridors and tourism corridors, because that would, in my mind, save a whole bunch of tourism businesses. It would really give our business some confidence, and it would get many of our aircraft in the air. And we would potentially deploy even more aircraft based on what the demand profile was too. At the moment on the Tasman, we fly everything from an A320 right up to a 777. So we've got, we've never had fleet flexibility like we've got at the moment, because, as you say, we've got so many aircraft on the ground.
Yeah, the timing of it as well, coming into winter with just opening up Queenstown for that, would be the escapism would also be the same from Aussie side, potentially wanting to come over too. It would be a huge definitely benefit to it as well, because I think you guys just had your 80th anniversary, right, as well.
Yeah, that was a bit that was more low key than we had anticipated. We had some significant entertainment and parties organised, which were very hastily cancelled. So I think we did end up sending a magazine to our customers, but it's clearly not the way that we had anticipated celebrating our 80th, which was going to be reflecting on the airline, the challenges, and then looking forward to some of the growth into new markets. So it's fair to say those celebrations are on hold or on ice at the moment. But, we've got to have confidence about this business rebounding. We've got to have confidence that hopefully the public are behind us and they want us to succeed and grow. And we're very fixated and determined to make sure this is a successful commercial business supporting New Zealand tourism, and a business that New Zealanders ultimately will want them to be proud of us. So that's what we're in the trenches at the moment, but we will come through this.
Mate, mega. On that note, Cam, I know you've got a few $1 billion you got to go make, so I'll leave you to it.
Hey, thanks for your time, and thanks for reaching out. I'll catch you soon, and hopefully more positive times.
No, for sure, man. Really appreciate your time, and thanks so much, bro. Legend.
Cheers, mate. Cheers.
I'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Cam Wallace, Chief Revenue Officer in New Zealand. Good banter. Big challenges. Massive challenges. Even just, the average Kiwi wouldn't think of the logistical shit show of planes sitting on the tarmac. Where do they sit? Like, where do you put a flipping 100 planes, right? Coming back on, how do you make sure you're not, it's one thing sitting next to, some dude that's just taking your seat and you're all squashed up and shit. It's another thing to figure out, okay, how do we have space? Does everyone get their own row? I can pretty much guarantee, though, when they start these flights back up internationally, if you're going economy, there's probably going to be some free upgrades. Because I don't think if there's no business travel, then first class is free. So definitely be asking for that when you start going. And the different revenue models. How do you leverage these assets which are sitting there as well? How do they keep all their different pilots keeping their credentials up? Because obviously pilots have to be able to fly certain amounts to keep that up too. But clearly the combination between for New Zealand of brand New Zealand being green and safe and out to the world, that combo of government, Tourism New Zealand, Air New Zealand has got to be, there will be some gnarly WhatsApp groups between those three. I can flip and guarantee it. So very cool that he spent his time. Not going to lie, we wanted to push Cam's out just for a little bit because clearly he's had some bigger fish to fry than to come and have a banter with me. So appreciate Cam for his time. Enjoy the rest of the day, team. It was a pretty good one.